you have these memes that are flooding the our mental ecology, and should we fight memes with memes? And the arms race idea is exactly what happens, right? Okay, I'm going to take your subversive meme or your whatever it is that you're trying to do, and to do an end run around it or ridicule it, out ridicule each other. That's exhausting, even just talking about it. And the people that are, and it's a lot easier to disrupt and deconstruct and destroy reality and normal logic rather than it is to build it back. So, I think it serves the purpose of those that are trying to tear down when we try to weaponize it. So it makes it difficult. And, a lot of people it's at a state-sponsored level now are being paid. It's their job. So, hobbyists and good-natured people on the internet that are trying to fight it through self-policing, it's a Red Queen situation. I don't know if we'll ever be able to catch up. And then you add bots and other things that are just churning it out, and no hope at that point. So that strategy, I think, is it might be for certain crisis moments, but I can't see that as a long-term strategy for winning.
This time on 20 Minutes into the Future, John Lebkowski and Scoop Sweeney discuss Biology of Disinformation, a research paper about media viruses, bots, and weaponized propaganda with Jake Dunagan, one of the paper's authors.
Welcome to the Plutopia News Network. Today's guest is Jake Dunagan. Jake is a research director at Institute for the Future, focusing on the examination of social invention and the redesign of systems in light of current and emerging tools and knowledge. He's done the usual research and writing, the white paper sort of thing, but he's also worked with speculative design, creating three-dimensional scenarios with imagined future artifacts. Jake worked with the Governance Futures Lab at IFTF, and originally we thought we'd be talking today about the future of governance. However, he was recent co-author with David Peskovitz and Doug Rushkoff of a study called The Biology of Disinformation, Memes, Media Viruses, and Cultural Inoculation. It's an important paper worthy of our focus today, though we might jump down any number of rabbit holes in our time together. So my first question is about the paper that you recently worked on. How did this Biology of Disinformation paper come together?
There's probably more of a longer backstory than I was involved in. When I came back to the Institute last year, my colleagues David Peskovitz and Doug Rushkoff were working on this already. And I think Google was funding part of it. Obviously, this is, I think, started in early 2017. So everybody was pouring money into think tanks and consultancies and thought leaders and everyone else to try to make sense of what had just happened, especially in the social media space and the weaponization of memes and disinformation and social networks. So again, it's a little hazy for me of the exact backstory, but I think that's the cultural situation of which spurred it. And so, I came in, this is something obviously I'm interested in generally as a futurist, but also, I wrote my dissertation on neuropolitics. So the angle of ways to influence our thinking to create mental ecologies that serve certain agendas is exactly what I was looking at, or part of what I was looking at, thinking about neuropolitics. So this was deeply interesting to me, relevant, and obviously the scale of the issue and the stakes involved were very high, as we've seen.
Well, it's probably good to ask you to define memes, and especially in how they relate to sort of like the cognitive operations, the what you refer to as neuropolitics, how memes impact the way that we think and the way that we act.
Yeah, I mean, the definition of meme is very slippery, which we talk about in the paper. It seems to aspire to some sort of precision that's not really there. But it was coined by Richard Dawkins in '76 in his book, The Selfish Gene, talking about basically what a cultural version of a gene would be, a parcel of information that gets shared and spread. and has, gets spread and reproduced over time and throughout society. So the idea of this kind of nuggeted piece of culture, I think, is the general idea. Over time, and with the internet, it's really come to mean, cat memes and, people falling down and all the little just nuggety, silly things that exist out there. But, seeing how this little nugget of information, which is generally like a picture with a short phrase, just the packaging of that is very seductive, and it kind of works against some of our defenses, overcome some of those, and is made to spread. So that's another part of it as well. So a little nugget of cultural information designed to spread and be shared is the closest thing I can come up with to a precise definition, and that's not very precise.
So when you're talking about weaponization of memes, it's like you've got people who really take time to figure out how these things can be used effectively to create like whole belief systems. And they learn how to deploy them into social media systems, for instance, or you refer to the mediascape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the level of design and intention in those, I think, it's probably lighter than we think. I mean, it's not some grand plan, but it's just flooding it with toxic stuff, and it's trying to disrupt the normal flow of logic, rationality, and conversation. So it's a lot easier to insert a meme into a conversation to disrupt rather than to build a whole worldview around it. So that's the only part of that question that I might think a little bit more about it, because I don't think it's really trying to push a particular worldview other than disrupting the worldviews that are out there. And then that opens the door for conspiracies, challenging mainstream media and consensus reality. Some good stuff too, which we could talk about. It used to be back in the day, the subversiveness of these kind of things was something that was lauded by many people. But seeing how it has been turned to really just make it very difficult and very noisy for people to try to figure out what's real and what's not. You might have seen the recent story about the vaccination anti-vax campaign and how that was part of the same kind of reality confusing, noise-making intention, really just to challenge the hegemony of a certain point of view. So it goes from very high sometimes, and you wonder about the motivations, and at other times, other than just to muck it up, to muck up our mental ecology in a way, and then people can take advantage of it if they see the opportunities.
The paper says meme replication depends on volume and brute force, and seems to be predicting an arms race of sorts, where you have the censors on social media fighting against the people, the engineers that create these memes and create the means of distribution. Can anyone actually win an arms race like this? Yeah,
that was kind of our way of getting to the conclusion was, okay, you have these memes that are flooding the our mental ecology, and should we fight memes with memes? And that arms race idea is exactly what happens, right? Okay, I'm going to take your subversive meme or your whatever it is that you're trying to do, and to do an end run around it or ridicule it, out ridicule each other. That's exhausting, even just talking about it. And the people that are, and it's a lot easier to disrupt and deconstruct and destroy reality and normal logic rather than it is to build it back. So, I think it serves the purpose of those that are trying to tear down when we try to weaponize it. So it makes it difficult. And, a lot of people, it's at a state-sponsored level now, are being paid. It's their job. So, hobbyists and good-natured people on the internet that are trying to fight it through self-policing, it's a Red Queen situation. I don't know if we'll ever be able to catch up. And then you add bots and other things that are just churning it out, and no hope at that point. So that strategy, I think, is it might be for certain crisis moments, but I can't see that as a long-term strategy for winning.
It is kind of weird to think that somebody who comes across as just an internet troll, basically typical like trolling behavior, that might actually be some Russian agent sitting in some, factory somewhere in Russia, just sort of churning that stuff out.
I guess it's remarkable, but also foretold very clearly by Bruce Sterling and others along the way.
Yeah.
It's funny how something that looks so provocative and outlandish at some level, we just accept it. That's our reality now. But it's been in the works for a long time, and now I think it's front and center. We can't, because of the election and all the things that happened. We're having to confront it. It's not some marginal issue. It's part and parcel of democracy. If we don't solve this, it's going to be really hard to hold our institutions together.
It's sort of like the future has arrived. I mean, 2 decades ago, you couldn't have done this because we were still on the tail end of the era of mass media, and you didn't have the kind of social media as petri dish effect that you have now, where you could just sort of drop a virus into it and watch it spread.
Yeah, I mean, 1 billion people, right, or more. A line of code can reach, or a piece of media can be spread within minutes or hours to millions and millions of people. So the speed and scale are unprecedented, and that again makes it a challenge, a dilemma. I don't know if we're ever going to solve it, but we need some tools for at least mitigating some of the worst effects of it.
The idea of these bots circulating more or less autonomously on the internet recalls some of the more scary science fiction plots in which, the sentient virus takes over. That may not happen, but it's scary enough to where these bots seem to just be basically out of control.
Yeah, one of my advisor in future studies, Jim Dater, has a line. He says, "Any useful statement about the future should at first appear to be ridiculous." And I think we've sort of known that, at least in the futures world. Yes, that's true. I think we're all feeling it in our bones right now. And so any scenario virtually, is all of a sudden plausible. And the things that we would think are as ridiculous, like, some sort of bot network becoming our overlords. If in a certain way you state it that way, but if you think about subtle manipulation and the kind of persuasive tools that can read us and know us better and know our patterns of behavior, know our emotional triggers better than we do, once this stuff is automated and algorithmically delivered, we may not be able to see the outside. We can see some Russian trolling fairly easily. There are certain signs about when they're posting and their language, and there's certain ways to suss it out, but in a very short time, it's going to be almost impossible to tell real from not real. And moreover, we're going to be that's going to be very, very targeted. And the level of sophistication right now is pretty poor. And when machine learning is able to smooth some of these rough patches, it's going to be incredibly powerful. And we're heading into that zone right now.
Do you think we're headed to a bot that will pass the Turing test?
Oh, yeah, maybe. I mean, that's a whole can of worms, but
it wouldn't necessarily have to, would it?
I think it would pass our individuals. I think it could understand us in a way that it might fool a one-on-one, but maybe not a group of people, or maybe not a select number that are diverse. But they're going to get good at knowing us and knowing our patterns individually. And that's, at that point, who cares if it's a Turing test? If it's working on you, that's all that matters.
Well, one way to avoid being sucked into some bot's vortex is to make sure that you're hanging out with people that you actually know in three-dimensional space. Mm. And you guys sort of allude to that in there. I used to think that the probable solution to this kind of problem was just media literacy, that we educate people and, that we focus on critical thinking. But I got the impression from reading the paper that you guys didn't think that was really enough in and of itself, and it would probably be hard to do anyway.
Yeah, and maybe media literacy is why we have this problem, is that people understand how this stuff works so well that they can manipulate those processes. It's like if everybody learns to be an immunologist or, working in genetic engineering, then bad actors will have that information as well. So, I'm afraid the idea of adding media literacy and stirring is not going to be our solution in total.
But if we got offline more and spent more time in relationship with each other, where we can actually see and touch each other, that seems to be what you're recommending as the best solution that you guys could think of, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's and I think we say something along the lines of it's our organic bonds, the social bonds that we can create in a person-to-person way. That's how we evolved. And these technologies, they're mediating that in a way. It's not the technology's fault. It's really just the fact that we can't connect and establish those social bonds in ways that we have generally, we as human species have accustomed to doing that and forming those connections. So staying connected to real humans, I don't know if it's the total solution either, but I think it would help. And I think it would, be part of that cultural immune response that we talk about.
Well, kind of getting back to the political question, I know that in the conversations, the public conversations, where politicians are weighing in about whether Russia affected the election or not, one response is, well, no, they didn't, because they didn't like jack into voting machines. But this mimetic strategy probably had a really profound effect on the election, didn't it?
That's politics is persuasion, right? Going in and changing votes may or may not have happened, but changing minds. Yeah, that's what it's all about, and sowing doubt and saying that Hillary's a crook, and Trump won the meme war without Russian trolls anyway. Burn the witch, lock her up, build the wall, drain the swamp. Those things are super sticky, and just chant those over and over again, and try to come up with something that Hillary was saying that has that kind of stickiness. And so you mix that stickiness with an army of people that's spreading it out there, and it's a recipe for changing minds. So who knows? The margins were very small in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. But it's something like Drain the Swamp, which came 6 days before, about a week or two before the election, and really took hold. Things like that. That's what you do. That's why you spend money on campaigns and advertising. You're trying to get people to remember your message, and for that to change behavior, and to connect that emotional part with the decision making. And I think Trump, with or without Russians, was able to do that more effectively.
The paper scared me a bit with a study you found from the University of Memphis that found that shorter memes, fewer than 4 words, do the best, and that concrete terms and memorable language is better than abstract language. In other words, you don't need to be profound. It just needs to be simple and easy to understand.
Concrete metaphors that really that allow us to see a picture in a very short package or very small package, and that's has been proven over and over again to be very effective.
Yeah, all you have to do is shout Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi.
Yeah, we spend millions on Senate hearings, investigations. All of that is almost irrelevant to Benghazi, because that sticks in your mind. And whether you really understand the details or understand that Hillary spent 11 hours answering questions and nothing, was really certainly not illegal, and all of the details of that wash away in the moment, and especially in the flood of information that we have. And so getting sticky, getting small, getting concrete metaphors and visceral embodied metaphors that seems to work for better or worse. So we're going to have to understand that and deal with it.
So politics is supposed to produce decisions about governance. And governance was originally what I was hoping we would talk about today before I read the paper. But I just wonder how this sort of mimetic warfare that we're seeing, what impact it has on our ability to have any kind of effective governance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even beyond mimetics. It's just structural with democracy, and apologize, I can't remember if it was Aristotle, or Plato, but it basically that democracy basically is good for those that can get elected, right? I mean, that's what politics serves. It serves those who can win. And so winning an election is not governing. And I think we've seen that clearly. And so the structure of this first, single person as a leader, first past the gate, all of that, the structure of the way that we elect even the idea of leaders is problematic. But the fact that we elect a small number of people to represent us and to make decisions, and we do that by, some version of an election where a single person wins, I think it incentivizes certain kinds of people and certain kinds of behavior and certain kinds of messaging that are often in conflict with what real decision making and governance should be. And so that's a tension that's always been there, and the norms of our political system have sort of held up against that until now. And again, we're having to confront all these structural issues in the guise of kind of abhorrent personalities. But I think I hope people see that the people that keep coming to the top are there because of structural reasons, and that we should think of ourselves as social inventors and political systems designers, and we need to think about creating systems that have the outcomes that we want, instead of just gnashing our teeth and trying to fix a system that seems to be systematically at odds with our desires.
So you guys at IFTF were doing some work with mayors from around the country for a while, and I know I brushed against that at one point. What's coming out of that work with the mayors? Yeah,
I mean, this is something I'm very excited about. So you can probably tell by the tone of my response is the lack of confidence I have at our national systems and our international systems of governance. But mayors are there and they're on the ground, and they are, fixing potholes, but also espousing the vision of these cities, and that's, billions of people now in urban environments. And so I'm very high on mayors as a vector. And this is a story that people have been talking about for a while now, cities and mayors, but seeing it firsthand, working with mayors through the Austin Civic Innovation Office and the mayor's office here in Austin. During South by, we ran a series of workshops with U.S. mayors there, teaching them skills of foresight, some concepts and platforms of future studies, providing that framework, which, honestly, they didn't really have that kind of systematic thinking tools for futures thinking, even as critical decision makers. So we wanted to share some of those tools to help their capacity for foresight at an abstract level, but we also did some creative work with them to create artifacts from the future, which was really fun and exciting and different for them to use those muscles to create a representation of a preferred future for their cities. In this case, we did a series of posters with U.S. mayors, trying to take the issues that matter to them and put it into a speculative form, an artifact from the future that stands to pull a vision, to pull attention to issues that they have and a future that they want to see happen for their cities. And so it acts as a conversation piece, a strategic tool for thinking through the future, and just a set of frameworks for helping mayors do that. So we've done a couple of workshops now this year in different venues and different contexts with U.S. mayors, and the response has been fantastic across political aisles, Republicans, Democrats, big cities, small cities, diverse groups, places in the country, geographies, stories, histories. It's been very rewarding to see how the uptake that mayors have had and how they're using this in their own work. And we've had a lot of anecdotal feedback that this has been, using it with their staffs and city council and taking these tools and applying them in their daily life and in their work as mayors. So that's been very exciting, and hopefully just at the beginning of doing that. And I think it's again a vector for a lot of positive change if we can. As one article said, 2018 is the year of mayors as futurists. If we can take that forward, I think that's going to be a lever for a lot of positive change.
Did you discuss with the mayors the seems to be growing conflict between federal control versus local control, especially in Austin, even the state versus local control? And that seems to be a real developing problem. People who used to be all for local control are suddenly, unless they disagree with us, then we want to control them.
Right. Yeah. We feel it in higher relief in Austin than probably anywhere else. And we're probably the bluest city and one of the reddest states, although everything's changing. But, that's a big issue for a lot of cities, is that cities tend to be more progressive oriented, more diverse, tend to be more left-leaning in general than the surrounding rural. So the city-rural divide is very strong. But most states are run, not saying every city is Republican or Democrat and vice versa, but state legislatures tend to be very conservative, and of course the federal government now as well. So that the idea of higher level of control preempting local laws is a big dynamic, I think, of certainly in the next 5-10 years and maybe beyond. So I think we're going to see these battle lines being drawn. And, I've thought about this and looked into it a little bit. I'm certainly no expert, but I'm just trying to figure out what devices the cities have to resist having their laws preempted, right? And here in Texas, it's not just sanctuary cities or Uber and Lyft. It's how we cut our trees down and just very simple things. Now it's almost a blanket preemption of anything we do in Austin is going to draw the ire of the state legislature, and there's going to be pushback against it. You see plastic bag bans in cities being overturned by states. So that dynamic, I think, is going to be one of the fracture lines we're going to see in U.S. politics. And I'm just curious to see what strategy cities are going to take to try to push back against that. The governing structures are kind of stacked against cities in that way, and the higher levels of government preempt city laws. So we'll see what new and experimental ways that cities can resist some of the changes that they don't want to see.
Well, I recall in your work at the Governance Futures Lab, that was very focused on really rethinking how civic society works, sort of reinventing the whole thing. Is the Governance Futures Lab still active, and is it aligned with this work you're doing with the mayors?
Yeah, that's part of our Governance Futures Lab. We are kind of defining identity now is really to try to create I don't want to use the military word, but an army of social inventors, right? I think we need a renaissance of political systems design. And so we're trying to facilitate that through research, through talks, through convenings, through toolkits. And, we think about that ourselves at the lab, and I think it's super the future, but I think it's going to need to be a grassroots movement to invent new kinds of political systems, to try them out. And it could be at a local level, it could be at a church, a school, a nonprofit, a co-op. I know, you're near and dear to that
yes.
Thinking in business. So I think we need to think about governing and political system design holographically throughout our society and find ways to experiment with new ideas, new ways to connect, new ways to collaborate, make decisions together, and then we need to spread those good ideas beyond, because I'm afraid we're hitting a wall or coming to a chasm, and if we don't have any other ideas, I'm fearful for where we're going to go. And I think we're seeing some of that autocracy and falling back on old models that we really don't want, but there's no alternative.
Yeah, I know if we could just get people to talk to each other, that would be a big first step. I mean, it's so divisive now. And I think it would be very powerful. I really believe in what you guys were doing at the Governance Futures Lab, and I think it would be powerful if that could be distributed, and if more and more people could go through those kinds of exercises, because it's a very powerful experience.
Yeah, I think so too. I think framing ourselves all collectively as systems designers, social inventors, there are enough shared values if we can sort of get out of the blinders of the present and our own agendas of the time, and that cuts across. And I think just being able to think about, okay, let's figure out what our shared values are, and let's design systems that help make those things happen and help things that we don't want to happen not to happen. And so that kind of framing of builders and architects and designers, I think, gets us out of that tribalism that our politics has become. Maybe it's always been that, but it's toxic now for sure.
What are you working on right now?
We are continuing to work with the Austin Civic Innovation Office. Going to do a new workshop next year for South by with mayors. At the Institute, highly relevant, as you can imagine, our big conference is coming up, and it's all around trust. It's called Trust on Trial. So we're looking at the lack of institutional trust, or the degrading of institutional trust. We're looking at things like the neurobiology of trust. Of course, we're looking at fake news and computational propaganda as well. So trust as the crux of a broader conversation about, I think, again, to me, this is my own view, but it's really on what are the foundations of which we're going to redesign our society and our political systems. And we need to get very sharp about those and, use those as a springboard to creating what comes next.
Learn more about Jake at jakedunagan.com. With John Lebkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney, and this is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.